a conversation between you and another passionate thought leader who's been working on energy and sustainability issues for many decades. Someone who's widely considered as one of the leading experts on energy and sustainability, especially its efficient use and sustainable supply. Call me crazy, but what if this person also understands all aspects of a solution necessary for change and has great knowledge on the technical innovations now available to us? That would be just amazing. Does anybody have any idea? Amory Lovins! The co-founder of Rocky Mountain Institute and its chief scientist, Amory Lovins. And there he is! This is going to be revolutionary. Let me take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Jeff Ramsdell. I'm a professor in the Department of Sustainable Technology and the Built Environment here at Appalachian, and I'm the director of the Appalachian Energy Summit. Now, I didn't expect that. But my job here tonight is simply to pose questions that I've collected from audience members and stand back and learn from the lively, relevant, and yes, possibly revolutionary comments from our guests. So if I may, I will begin with the first question, and we're going to start with a seemingly simple question, and we'll start with Mr. Lovins, since Mr. Kennedy just finished his remarks. And this question is, what do each of you think are the current key technologies and other game-changing ideas on which we should focus efforts while developing sustainable energy solutions? Hello?
You can do a lot with technologies, and they change really fast. I was just looking at some numbers from Great North Carolina company Cree, I think is represented here. And it looks like white LEDs, light-emitting diodes, every decade get 30 times more efficient and 20 times brighter and 10 times cheaper. That's why they're taking over. And they're kind of like photovoltaics inside out. They turn light into electricity. Photovoltaics and LEDs turn electricity into light. And if you look across the whole range of energy uses, there's stuff going on that is similarly revolutionary, not always developing that fast, but collectively we can now save twice as much energy as I used to think in the 80s at a third the real cost. That's just the innovation that's already happened, not what's going to happen. But I think this technology is not the only game in town. At least equally important is design, the way we combine technology. So I think my first candidate would be what we call integrated design, where you design a building or a factory or a vehicle as a whole system for multiple benefits, rather than isolated components for single benefits. And the result is you get bigger savings at lower cost. So the more you save, the less it costs. You get expanding returns, not diminishing returns. That's a big game changer. We've been hatching that in our little black swan hatchery at Rocky Mountain Institute and figuring out how to take it to scale. There is huge financial innovation, and not just the conventional things like being able to put solar cells in a real estate investment trust or master limited partnerships for renewables, but things like power purchase agreements for megawatts and letting them bid in the same auctions against supply, which you can do now in about 3/5 of the country. Or some of the remarkable financial structures that now let Solar City, that's leader in the rooftop solar invention, get capital 2 or 3 percentage points cheaper than a typical regulated utility does, because it has lower risk than a typical utility. utility. That's what the capital markets are telling us. And I think the third thing is new business models. Again, not a technology, but to give you a simple example that Dave Moskowitz in Maine cooked up. He's an engineer, lawyer, used to chair their Public Utility Commission. And he said, look, suppose I'm selling electric cars. I could sell you the same car $10,000 cheaper, maybe that's not the right number, but some big number like that, provided that when that car is parked and plugged in, and our cars are parked and idle about 95% of the time, you will allow me, as the owner, will allow me as the manufacturer to do background transactions between the car and the grid, which will in no way compromise your driving capability or experience. And the deal is I can probably make more than $10,000 or whatever dollars on those transactions, but also I'm going to sell a lot more cars at that big a discount. And this is actually starting to make sense even for white goods. Like, you could probably give people the washing machine for free, provided it only runs between, say, 11 at night and 4 in the morning or something like that. And it'll be quiet so it won't wake you up. Because it's worth more to the utility to do that load shifting than the washing machine costs. That kind of business model is starting to emerge in a whole lot of places, and there are many, many more like that. I'll give you a simple example I just ran across the other day. A guy is doing a startup with an improved software package for academic scheduling. So if you know all of the classes and activities taking place, say, on this campus over the next year, it will put everyone in the correct room or space. Well, the guy realized, hey, if I know that, I know a whole lot about the electric load shape of this campus, and I know it a year ahead. That's information that's very valuable to the grid operator, and I can sell them that and help them optimize their system and save everybody money, and I'll get more revenue for the campus that way. And there are a lot of other things you could do with it, like you could, if it's just classroom stuff, you could consolidate perhaps more classes into fewer buildings and run them optimally at full load, and crank other buildings down because there won't be anybody there. So it's a new world with the IT energy mashup, and it creates extraordinary new forms of value, and it also informs and enables and organizes customers to take power into their own hands, just as you were saying. So customers are figuring this out, that they can use fewer electrons more productively, make some of their own, and even trade them with somebody else. With one more example of that sort. We were just visited by a German utility executive from a very big company. He doesn't buy his electricity from his own company. He happens to live in Holland. And in Holland, there is a website that's kind of like a music file sharing or video sharing website, but it's legal. It's called Van Bron, from the source. And you can see pictures and information and prices from all the different other customers you can buy from. So he buys his from a little biogas generator run by a pig farmer who was standing there in the photo with a really cute piglet that he liked to look at. Guess what? At Christmas, he gets a personal Christmas card from his electricity provider. What utility could dream of that level of customer intimacy?
Mr. Kennedy, you have anything to add?
I want to make sure that, like, can you in the back rows, can you hear Amory? Can you raise your hand if you can hear him? Okay. So he's such a genius, I don't want you to miss him and what he's saying. But I would say from a technology, and Amory actually would be better at this than I am, but I would say LED bulbs would be my first. And electric cars, I think, are going to be transformative. Electric cars cost less than 5 cents per mile to drive over the life of the car, and it's about 15 cents a mile, about 3.2 for some of the cheapest electric cars over the life of the car, which includes maintenance, repairs, the cost of the car, and the gasoline, the fuel cost, and about 15 cents a mile over the life of the car for a 12 to 15 cents for an internal combustion engine. So it's a 5 times differential. If you believe in markets, and you have to believe that that is going to, that it's going to see wide-scale adoption. And, you know, if you look back about 10 years ago, they first built the first flat-screen televisions. They were $11,000, and it was kind of a novelty item for, you know, the richest 1%. But now, and 7 years later, you can get up to $300 in any Best Buy. And 7 years after they appeared, the last vacuum tube TV company closed its doors and shut down its factories. There was no headlines. It was a technology they didn't even see it coming. And in 7 years, it completely occupied the marketplace and put out of business all the incumbents. And you know, and the savings and quality that you get from electric cars is comparable at least, and much greater in terms of the savings that you get to flat screen TVs and the vacuum tube TVs. LED is the same thing. An LED lasts 25 years or 30 years. It uses 10% of the energy. It has a very, if you leave the bulb on all the time, it has a 6-month payback. You know, people don't do that, but that's what it would have. Plus, there's other costs. Like, you look at those lights up there. Those lights, one of those lights is going to die. And the maintenance guy who takes care of this hall has to decide, do I bring a cherry picker in and fix that one light and, you know, use my work crew for a day? If you have LED bulbs in there, you never have to make that decision because the bulb will last longer than the building. So, you know, all of these, you have these extraordinary cost savings on photovoltaic cells, which gets cheaper and cheaper every year because they're just like the computer chips, the same technology, and they're going to continue to get cheaper. You won't see those advantages in wind power because a wind turbine there's a lot of capital material that goes into wind. You need a lot of steel and you need a concrete, and those are stable. Those are not variable costs. Those are stable costs. They're never really going to change dramatically. But with a photovoltaic cell, well, maybe you think steel is going to go down.
Well, no,
There's
a whole lot you can do to continue to cut the cost of wind farms. They're coming right down. And the power purchase agreements 2 years ago, in the 2 regions that have almost all the new installations, the cheapest wind power was selling for 1.4 to 1.9 cents a kilowatt hour. The average was 2.5. Now that's net of a tax credit that's now gone away. That's worth about 1.8, but still very competitive and causing even nuclear plants to shut down as uneconomic to run.
Well, I defer to Amory on that.
But
It would be fun just to hear me talking and you have him correct me.
But let me pick up on a couple of really important points you raised. First one is about the LEDs. Notice that LEDs plus photovoltaics do something quite magic. For 1.2 billion people who live on at most $2 billion or $2 per household per day. These are the people not on grid. And how many of you have seen those ads by Peabody saying how we need more coal to light up the lives of those impoverished people? Oh, that's interesting. They've run a huge ad campaign on this. But, of course, these are the people that the grid has taken decades not to reach, and if it did, they couldn't afford that power. However, turns out the way they get their light is to burn kerosene. That was John D. Rockefeller's first oil business, and it's now going away because those people are spending $38 billion a year on kerosene. So they're paying a fifth of the total world cost of lighting services, and they're getting 1/1000th of the light because those lamps are so inefficient, as well as terribly polluting and giving you eye and lung disease. So, now, at a 6,000th the cost per unit service of a flashlight, those 1.2 billion people can light up their lives and teach their daughters to read, and by the way, charge their cell phones with gadgets like this. It's called a Waka Waka, Swahili for shines brightly. You can get one and give one at Waka, waka-waka.com. So here is a state-of-the-art photovoltaic. On this side are state-of-the-art LEDs. They're really bright. They'll run like this for 10 hours on a charge, or they'll run like that for 150 hours on a charge. You can stick this right on a Coke bottle or hang it from the ceiling or whatever. It pays back in a few weeks to a few months. So you get it, you lease it or buy it from an entrepreneurial woman in the village, and it's like getting a perpetual annuity that gives you an extra month's income every year. Think about that as a business model. Think about it as a way to transform the lives of 1.2 billion people, and that's just a combination of very efficient LEDs, so you get a long life out of efficient photovoltaics, and inside are lithium batteries engineered to withstand high temperatures sitting in the tropical sun all day, and some really good Dutch control electronics. That's the kind of thing that is spreading like wildfire. Solar cells are spreading faster than cell phones. And that is really transformational. Which brings me to the other point I'd like to emphasize that comes out of your wonderful flat screen television sample. I gave a talk recently to 150 oil CEOs in Oslo, including showing them a Waka Waka. And left them kind of in shock because I laid out the competitive landscape that they have to operate in. And they were focusing a lot on how they want lower costs and higher prices for their oil products. Well, price exceeds cost is the second part of the business imperative, but they were forgetting the first part, which is value must exceed price. And if somebody else provides a better value proposition and takes your customers' revenues, it doesn't matter how good you are at running your oil company, you're gone. Which leads to the point that the pace of these transformations is not set by incumbents, it is set by insurgents. Tony Seba, the Stanford Innovation Lecturer, dug out of the National Archive a couple of wonderful pictures illustrating this, looking down Manhattan's Fifth Avenue in the Easter Parade. In 1900, you have to look hard to see the first car. In 1913, you have to look even harder to find the last horse. The horse and buggy folks thought they had many decades to adapt. It would take forever to build new traffic lights and filling stations and so on to replace our stables. Well, what Henry Ford did was cut the nominal price of the Model T by 62% in 13 years. Guess what? Cost of solar cells just dropped 80% in 5 years. And that's like a meteorite strike into the heart of the fossil fuel business. So the insurgents are not held back by the business models, the mentality, the culture, the legacy assets of the incumbents. They just go for it. They don't need your old infrastructure. And actually it's worse than that, because capital flees before customers do. At the first whiff of disruption, scented at the speed of Twitter, the investors will flee before the customers do. They'll pull their money out, decapitalize you, and put it into your successors. That is now happening to the oil and electricity businesses, and many of them don't even realize it.
Amory just mentioned that the cost of money to Solar City is 3 percentage points less than the cost of the utilities, which means the investment community has already anointed Solar City as a more reliable bet than
Less risky.
Less risky than utilities. Which, if they start thinking about that, that has to strike fear in their hearts.
Yeah, and the cost of solar power is all about cost of capital and cost of equipment. The equipment is coming down and going to come down more, and that's accelerating. Not just modules, but the balance of plant, and especially the soft costs of all the red tape of permitting and financing and so on. Germany still puts solar systems on the roof at half the cost we do, even though we all buy the same equipment.
Before we came out here, I was showing an article to Amory that showed that yesterday in Denmark, Denmark through wind power created 140% of its national energy demand.
Electric demand.
National electric demand, 140% from wind power in a single day.
Well, what's even more exciting is that last year they got over a third of their electricity from wind power on an annual basis, and well over half, probably 57% from renewables. And they don't have any hydropower of their own. They do trade, of course, with the other Nordic countries and with Germany, and they're probably the best in Europe at that. And they in Germany have 10 times as reliable power as we have in America. But they're actually 4 European countries that got about half their electric consumption from renewables last year. Besides Denmark, Scotland was over half, Spain probably 46%, Portugal I believe 64%, out on the end of the European grid. And notice that none of these countries added bulk electric storage or huge transmission projects, actually. What they learned to do is to run their grids the way a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but through coordination and planning, the ensemble continuously produces beautiful music. So I think the one main thing you said that I wouldn't quite agree with is about needing transmission, is, if I understood you, to bring, so let's say, solar power from the sunny desert Southwest or wind power from the Dakotas. Well, actually, say you're in Chicago, it's cheaper, or at least as cheap, let's say conservatively, to put your wind machines out in Lake Michigan, which is an excellent wind resource. And yeah, you have to pay for ice engineering and marine engineering and cable to bring the power ashore, but it's a whole lot closer than the Dakotas. And even between the Mojave and Vermont or upstate New York, really cloudy places, there's less than 2-fold difference in annual sun. So it's turning out in the US and Germany, Japan, and China, when you do a rigorous analysis, that top quality renewables far away have the same economics as middling quality renewables nearby, because you don't have to pay for the costs and losses of the lines, let alone the hassle of trying to get them built, let alone the vulnerability that anybody with a 30-06 can take it down. So I think we're starting to realize that a more localized, regionalized approach, letting all options compete, makes most of the new transmission actually unnecessary, which will make things a lot easier and I think less vulnerable.
Well, and this is, of course, what Germany did, just by creating a financial mechanism to guarantee people, farmers and homeowners, a price for the energy that they would produce through rooftop solar. It created I think about the greatest solar.
Through all renewables, and that's what got the prices down enough to start the Chinese revolution, that then drove everybody's prices way, way down.
Right.
China's the world leader in 7 renewables, and 2013 alone, China added more photovoltaic power than we have added in this country since we invented it 61 years ago.
Yeah, I think they're making 2 gigawatts a year of
they added 12 to 14 gigawatts last year, and they're expected to add 17 gigawatts this year. The most Germany ever added in a year, I believe, was 8. And we're struggling around, 2, 3.
Oh, and Germany has about the same amount of sunlight as like southern Alaska.
Yeah, Seattle. Or less than Seattle, I think. Yeah. So,
Gentlemen, I'm sorry, can we move on to a policy question?
having so much fun over here.
I knew my job was going to be easy. Let's spend some time. Thank you for those great remarks. And believe me, we could be here all night listening to you guys talk. We absolutely love it. The next question I have is a policy question, and it's quite long, but let me get all the way through it. It is sometimes argued that on a global issue such as climate change, corporate and or university initiatives to mitigate climate change or to pursue sustainability are often merely green fluff, that they often do not actually accomplish what is represented, and that they are too small a scale to have any impact on the real problem. The argument is that to make real headway, we need greater government involvement, mandates, and international agreements. So given our purpose here this week, do you think initiatives by the University of North Carolina system and individual campuses make a real difference?
Yes.
And Mr. Kennedy, we'll start with you this time.
I didn't hear the whole question. Was that a quote from one of the Koch brothers or something?
Absolutely not. There is this argument out there that people are posing. Maybe it is from somebody like the Koch brothers, but what we're getting at are the initiatives that we're doing corporate-wide and university-wide, even on a small scale, making a real difference without government involvement?
Without
government involvement.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that the real advances are just going to come from markets. I mean, the adaptation that we were talking about at the automobile just came from driving prices down, and and the same thing with flat screen TVs, the same thing with LEDs that you're seeing now. You know, the Edison bulbs are gone in Europe. There's only LEDs there, and that Edison bulb will be something in this country probably 5 years from now. They'll be illegal and they'll just be gone because of the markets. So I think markets are what ultimately is going to drive widespread adaptation of these. It's like any industry. You need some help from government. I don't believe in subsidies, but except in the case of nurturing and greenhousing new industries. You know, why are we giving any subsidy to the oil industry? $1 trillion in subsidies annually to the oil industry, when it is the wealthiest. It's established, been around for 100 years. It's the wealthiest industry in the history of mankind. They don't need subsidies. You do, you know, it is permissible for governments, even in free markets, to nurture new industries, to get them started, get them off the ground, to create jobs, to create economic transition. When George Washington became president, he wanted to have a suit that was made in America. But the British had banned mills in America because they wanted us to ship our cotton to Great Britain so that they could mill it over there and then they could sell us back the whole cloth. All the tailors were there and the mills were there, and we were forced buying stuff from them. And one of the first things that he did is he had a tailor shipped to the United States from Italy to make his suit here, but they still had to use European cloth. But after that, because of that, he created subsidies to help the merchants in New England to begin building mills so that we could start the industry here. And once it got kick-started, and it didn't need subsidies anymore, we were competitive on the world market. And that's the same thing that we should be doing with solar, and we should be facilitating the infrastructure. We should be paying for research and development and encouraging the military to buy this stuff and encouraging government.
They are. They're the
right. The military is being great about this right now because they see it as a battlefield strategy. You know, fuel has always been the thing that one of the major challenges for the military, and if they can use less of it, if they can make it themselves, they want to do that. So, and they've been very good about buying battery technologies and about developing this stuff and about making their bases self-sufficient. And we want to do those kind of things. But ultimately, the objective is to have the market drive the broader adaptation.
Yeah. Let me go up to 30,000 feet from that. We have the best government money can buy on the $1 one vote system. And it's optional one at the national level. In fact, can't legislate their way out of a paper bag. So, in that circumstance, even if you thought we all had to wait for Congress to tell us what to do, we'd wait till hell freezes over and we'd never get an answer. So, that's why it's the genius of the federal system lets us get the things that government needs to do done at a state and county and municipal and community level. So that's good, because then 1,000 flowers bloom, lots of innovation, people try different stuff, and we all learn fast. So what is it that government needs to do? Just what you talked about in getting the rules right so markets can work properly. At least in the U.S. philosophy, we are supposed to be a market economy. Now, it is a seriously distorted and corrupted market economy, because those who have gold make the rules, but it can work pretty well if you fix a few things that are done in places like public utility commissions at the state level, like rewarding utilities for cutting the bill, not for selling more energy. We have fixed that in about 16 states, and I hope this will become, we'll join that list. But in general, governments, I think, should steer, not row. Governments can set rules and make competition fair and information open, but governments do not have factories in general. They don't have stores. They don't have installers. They tend not to scale in the way that we need. And that is the role of the private sector and of entrepreneurship, operating under clear rules that reward what we want and not the opposite. So I think there is a complementarity between the two. Getting the policies right is very important, but that doesn't do the whole job. And I think the trick is to use our most effective institutions, private enterprise, co-evolving with civil society, enabled and sped by smart rules in mindful markets, sped also by military innovation, and use those effective institutions to go around our ineffective institutions. There's a lot of ways of getting things done in this country, and university initiatives are among the most important, because it's not just saving the energy and the dollars, it's also pedagogy and developing skills and attributes and aptitudes that students can then use to do more of the same and become really effective citizens the rest of their lives and teach others. So to get back to the most fundamental root of that question, I really don't see where the idea would come from that doing a lot of little things somehow doesn't deal with the real problem. The real problem is that we have made millions of not so good decisions in how we use and supply energy. And those add up to a really big problem. But it seems to me equally obvious that solutions can come from a lot of smart individual decisions, millions of them adding up to very big numbers. It's exactly the same thing. There's some magic silver bullet. It's a swarm of silver buckshot and birdshot, and we all got our piece of it.
Well, thank you for that reassurance, because I think that's exactly what's going on here in the UNC system and what we're so proud of here at the Energy Summit. Our next question is, you have both worked for decades to lessen our negative impacts on the environment. We have some current successes that both of you have talked about today that we can celebrate, such as the reality that we can now power our world with solar energy. But we are still losing ground with regards to climate change. As indicated once again recently in prominent scientific journals, please speak to why you think we have not been successful at lowering CO2 levels or slowing the rise of CO2 levels in the atmosphere, and how we can now best prepare future generations to cope with the changes in the planet.
Well, I think the reason that we haven't been more effective at it is because of the power of the incumbents, the political power and the financial power of incumbents to craft attitudes, to propagandize, to buy infrastructure, whether it's media or think tanks and politicians. And then I think the Citizens United case has really warped our democracy in a profound way. You've got the Koch brothers who are spending essentially the same amount of money as the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are spending on this election. And of course, we're not doing the rational things that are in our nation's interest and in the interest of humanity, which is to reduce our dependence on carbon and reduce, they've essentially, using money, they've orchestrated a suicide pact. They have, these are people who don't really have a moral compass except one that's pointed, straight at hell. And they're using their power to push our country down a very, very hazardous path because they're making money on it. So, and I would attribute our inability to change almost 80 or 90% to that, just to the power of the incumbents to warp and subvert our political process, so that it's not serving the interests of our country anymore.
Yeah, if you go back, my first professional paper on climate change was in 1968. This has been known about for a long time. Anybody paying attention would know in the 60s and 70s this was a really big existential issue. In fact, there were two, that and nuclear proliferation, the two side effects of badly run energy systems that could do us in, and they still are. But in those, when climate got to be a political issue in the 80s, mainly the coal industry ginned up fake studies to say solutions would be very expensive. And I'm afraid the environmental movement fell right into the trap and said, it will cost more to solve this problem, but not as much as you say, and it's worth it. What they should have said is, no, you got the sign wrong, S-I-G-N. This is not a cost, it's a profit, because efficiency is cheaper than fuel. It's cheaper to save fuel than to buy fuel, let alone burn it. And actually, we already price carbon in the sense that every CO2 molecule going up in the air has a little price tag attached called fuel price. And it's cheaper not to buy and burn the stuff and buy efficiency instead, megawatts, to do the same thing. But ever since then, that point got lost. And in fact, when I had a Scientific American article on it some years ago, I couldn't make this up. The editor wrote in the margin, what's a sign error? So we have fallen into the thrall of theoretical economists who wouldn't recognize a profitable energy efficiency if it came up and bid them. Because they suppose that markets operate everywhere and are essentially perfect, even in countries that don't use them much. And therefore, if there's some other thing we could do that would be cheaper than what we're doing now, we would have done it already. As if market failures didn't exist. Actually, market failures didn't exist, nobody could make money. It would be awfully dull. Your business would crash. Because you make money by discovering and exploiting a market failure before your competitor does. And they're 60 or 80 of them in buying efficiency. When we depend on theoretical economists with that mindset and they control most energy policy, then we end up in international negotiations about mutually agreed upon coercion. How can we get countries to do what's going to cost more? And you get into a very unproductive discussion about sacrifice and who's going to pay and how much and burden, when the conversation ought to be about opportunity and who's going to get the profit first. Now, I wish the negotiators in Paris every good fortune, and I think what they're trying to do would be extremely helpful. However, in a more fundamental sense, we shouldn't need an international agreement to get countries to do what's in their economic self-interest, if that self-interest is properly understood. So that's a bit of history. And now let me move to your assumption. Actually, global carbon release stabilized last year. And I think that is the harbinger of important things to come. And the most important element of that was that China's coal burn went down last year as their economy grew 7.4%, and that drop in coal use has accelerated this year. Now, what is making this gigantic coal burner, as big as the rest of the world combined, turn around so fast? Hardly that you can't breathe. Remember that Tom Lehrer song, "It's all right to breathe as long as you don't inhale"? So the air is so dirty, it's killing enormous numbers of people. It's a public health tragedy unfolding. They can't put up with that. They are very vulnerable to climate change, and they realize that's coming right at them. It could dry up their major rivers, a bunch of other bad stuff. And they don't like being the world's biggest coal and oil importer. That has serious national security implications. It raises tensions in the neighborhood and so on. So they have a lot of good reasons. And it's not just the central government. Beijing is about to shut down its last few coal plants in its immediate area, and there are big air quality restrictions and coal quality and coal burning restrictions coming up in cities and provinces all over the country real fast. So it happens that at Rocky Mountain Institute, we've been working with the China Energy Group at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and with our two Chinese counterparts. Their top energy policy group, called the Energy Research Institute, is an arm of their National Development and Reform Commission, which writes the nation's strategic plans. It's the planning agency for the whole country, kind of a super ministry over everybody else. And also Energy Foundation China, which they sponsor as a policy instrument, although it's an NGO. So these four organizations have had 50 people beavering away for 2 years to write the road plan for the energy revolution that, meanwhile, the paramount leaders have had the wisdom to call for. And they were pleased to discover that this is going on. Our customers for this exercise are the people writing the energy content of the 13th five-year plan, which is being baked right now. And they are very keen to put it in the hopper. Well, you know, I was talking about how government should steer, not row. Actually, in China, with a lot of big state-owned enterprises doing a lot of rowing in competition with the private sector, which is making most of the running for renewables, they have a different way of doing things. They do top-down central planning. It's a demand economy, and you can do stuff incredibly quickly. That's how they've generated more wind power than nuclear power each of the last 3 years, even though they have the world's most aggressive nuclear program. It's how they're running their coal plants less, even while they still continue building some more that were ordered years ago. So 2012, they actually increased electric generation more from non-hydro renewables than from all fossil nuclear plants combined. So I'll give you a sneak preview of what we found that will be published in about 5 weeks when this very rigorous and detailed study is released. That China could run their goal of a 7-fold bigger economy in 2050 using about the same energy as today. Their energy productivity would go up about 7-fold. And about 3/5, almost 3/5 of their energy supply by then could be non-fossil, burning 80% less coal. And that means their carbon productivity would go up 12-fold. And this would cost trillions of dollars less than business as usual, and would, by itself, as a byproduct of efficiency and renewables, cut their conventional air pollution 90 or 95%. before talking about cleaning up fuels or adding more end-pipe controls. And also, it is built on the kind of consumption-led, diverse, modern economy that is exactly the kind of growth they need. And part of the reason they can do better than we can is that they're building so much stuff, like a whole America's worth of new cities in the next 15 years, and it's a whole lot easier to build it right than fix it later. So very exciting times, and I think the world is at this tipping point where the climate solutions start to overpower the climate problem. And that is happening because so many people around the world are doing what you are doing. You're becoming part of the solution.
But given, back here in the United States, given the increasing levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, how do we instill a greater sense of urgency in some of the government, the general public, to do more of those things here?
Oh, I think we are. First of all, high praise to Pope Francis for that extraordinary statement. Almost daily from captains of industry, from our military leaders about how climate change is a threat multiplier and causes instability in failed states and mass migration and so on. From many of the icons we have depended upon, from many church leaders, particularly in the Southeast. Maybe they've seen Peter Bick's wonderful film, Carbon Nation. I think the polls show very clearly that American public opinion has turned on this. It's interesting. I'm apolitical. RMI has nothing to do with politics, but just as an outside observer, I noticed that those who oppose climate protection have taken the key levers of power in Congress, just as the public has come to reject that thesis. It's a little awkward timing for them.
Okay, well, we as I said earlier, would love to be here all night asking more of these questions and getting some incredible solutions from you. But we only have time for one more question. I want to bring it back to our core mission here at the university, to educate our students and to send out our students in the world to do great things. You know, David Orr has suggested that we need to get rid of the current ranking systems for our universities and use ranking systems that measure what are our students doing. Are they doing good things or are they doing bad things for future generations? So I'd like to hear a little bit from both of you on where you see the educational system, and not just higher ed, but all our education system fits in to these solutions that we've been talking about tonight.
There's a lot of ways to answer that question, because I think that this issue should be integrated into the entire education system, and we talked a little bit about this at lunch. That it's really about a struggle over resources, and it's a struggle over the life support systems of the planet. So, and it's in many ways, it's what Lincoln said, we're now engaged in a great civil war. And it's a civil war against the incumbents. And I spoke a little bit about this at lunch. The political system of a nation reflects its economic organization. And if the economic organization is made up of large agglomerations of power and wealth, like in the energy industry, which is controlled by a handful of companies, in the media industry, which is controlled by 6 companies, in agriculture, in the major sectors, then the government, the system of government is also going to begin to look like an oligarchy, like a corporate kleptocracy, which is what's happening in this country now. But if you have an energy system, for example, that is controlled by millions and millions of Americans, like they have now in Germany, in Denmark, and Portugal, where every American contributes, then it's a more democratic, it's a more resilient system. Very easy for a terrorist to blow up a power plant. It's pretty hard for him to blow up 1 million homes. What's more resilient, but it also, it tends to democratize everything. It tends to take the power away from, you know, the apocalyptic forces of ignorance and greed that are represented by the Koch brothers, and put the future of our country in the hands of millions and millions of Americans. And it democratizes the energy system. And Thomas Jefferson used to say that his central conviction is that America, to continue to have democracy, it had to be, the economy had to be controlled by tens of thousands of independent yeoman farmers, each with their little piece of land, each with a stake, an economic stake in our system. And by democratizing the economy, you would also democratize the government. So, and this is what Amory is talking about with distributed power. It's really an extraordinary opportunity to democratize our, you know, the economic system of this country. But in order to do that, we have to disrupt the current economic model, which is inefficient, it's dirty, it's dangerous, and it's bad for America. It's unpatriotic.
And the way to do that is to vote with your wallets.
Right. Right, vote for your wallets, but also support. You know, I always tell people it's more important to choose your politician than your light bulb, because they're the ones who are making the rules and make us, you know, that allow us to have a rational economy that will let us choose LED light bulbs and let them proliferate in the marketplace.
Well, your point's a very important and valid one. Efficient, renewable, distributed energy doesn't guarantee a better polity, but it's sure a big step in that direction. And that is why a very important part of the German Energiewende was to open up investment to everybody. Any citizen with, I think as little as $200 or so, could invest for a fair return in their or somebody else's renewable energy system. So now communities, individual citizens, co-ops own half the renewable capacity that provided 27% of Germany's electricity last year. In Denmark, it was even more dramatic. 86% of those wind farms are owned by farmers in their communities. And you don't hear much bad-mouthing of wind farms because they know whenever the blade goes around, that's more kroner in their pocket. And it's a beautiful kind of kinetic sculpture. Now, the thing that I find most encouraging in that trend is it's completely trans-ideological. If you watch Peter Bick's film, Carbon Nation, you'll see the one-armed rancher in a little town in Texas that was going down so far it lost its Dairy Queen, and how he was rescued by the great economics of wind power. And he's, you know, the wind that used to be a curse on his ranch is now a blessing, and he's making a lot more money on that than he did on the cattle, although he still runs cattle as well. Now, I'm sure he did not vote for the party that you would, but he had great conservative values, and he did the wind power for reasons important to him. This is, I think, the key to getting around our energy gridlock, even as sort of ideological trimmings around that tend to complicate our higher educational agenda. And it's really arrestingly simple. The transition to efficiency and renewables makes sense and makes money, whether you care about profits and jobs and competitive advantage, or about national security, or about creation, care, and environmental stewardship, and public health and climate protection, or about stronger families and communities, or. If you liked any one or more of those outcomes, you could support this transition without needing to like every outcome, and without needing to agree about which outcome is most important. So I think focusing on outcomes, not motives, can move us from conflict and gridlock to a unified solution to this common challenge. And I think that way of thinking is also so consistent with the academic deep lessons of the value of tolerance and diversity, learning from each other, that is at the heart of any liberal arts education or any good education, whatever you call it, that making that an essential part of our life on campus reinforces the social values that the university is here to perpetuate, propagate, and refine. Because universities are where we make the big bet, we play the long game, we try to perpetuate and pass on and improve what's been painfully learned over 1,000 generations. And there is no other place that does that in the same way. Energy can be a wonderful organizing principle for making those values real and passing them on, greatly strengthened.
Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Lovins. We thank you so much for your time here with us tonight. Thank you so much for your willingness to share your knowledge and insight with us, and your participation in the Appalachian Energy Summit and the Appalachian Summer Festival. Albert Einstein said, "Those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act." I think all of us here have a piece of the puzzle, the knowledge puzzle. I hope all of us will follow these two gentlemen, their lead, and act on our knowledge to help future generations. Thank you all for being here tonight. Please join me in another round of applause.